You don't own this gate. That's what she said standing on my property, pointing at the iron gate my grandfather forged with his own hands. Back in 1963, her voice could have cut glass. And the way she looked at me, you'd have thought she was laying down the law. Not trespassing on ground she'd never set foot on before. She had paperwork. She had a lawyer. She had the entire HOA behind her. What she didn't have was the truth. There I was, coffee cooling in my hand, sun barely up, just watching her try to claim something that never was, and never would be, hers. In that moment, I knew, right down in my bones, this wasn't going to end with words. There was a line, and she just crossed it. You know what? Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, because you're going to want to see how this one shakes out. And to really get why these people lost their minds, you need to know two things: the land and my grandfather. See, the land came first. 2 acres of open field. Nothing but dirt roads and wild grass when he bought it. My granddad, Ymt Corbett, saved up 20 years as a carpenter. Every dollar, every side job, every splintered finger went into that patch of earth. Paid cash. No bank. No debt. Nothing owed to anyone. He built a house with his own hands. Planted a natural hedge. And, from scrap metal he'd been collecting since the 50s, he forged that gate solid as the day he finished it. Rust and all. That lock on the gate. Brass. Hand-cast. Still turns smooth if you know the trick. I was 8 when Granddad first walked me the property line, finger tracing every stone marker he'd set in the earth. Boundaries aren't there to keep people out, Ellis, he told me, hand on my shoulder. They're reminders of what you protect. He showed me the original deed, the surveyor's report, the purchase agreement, all spread out across the kitchen table documents he'd gotten notarized the day he signed. Paper matters, he said. When someone tries to take what's yours, this is what saves you. I understood then why he did things the way he did, why he built his own gate, kept those records, wouldn't even throw away an old tax bill if it had our address on it. When he passed, 2018, everything went straight to me. The will was clear as day. His only grandson gets the land, the house, everything. And I'll tell you, selling it never even crossed my mind. I moved in, set up my photography equipment, turned the back room. Inheritance process was clean, title transferred, taxes paid, everything registered at the county land office. And right then, I found out something crucial. See, digging through property records, I found this official map showing the HOA boundaries established in 2005. Wellington Meadows Homeowners Association. The developers had bought up every bit of the old farmland around us, put up cookie-cutter houses, beige siding, matching mailboxes, the whole deal. But the map was clear. Their jurisdiction ended 50 meters before my gate. My land, my granddad's legacy, predated their whole setup by 42 years. We weren't in. We never had been. I put time into restoring the gate, same black paint Granddad used. Oak trees, their roots older than any HOA. Framed the driveway. I repainted the sign. Private property. Est. 1963. Careful to match each letter. Like it was a ritual. I oiled the brass lock, just the way he'd taught me. When I finally stood there, coffee in hand, lock clicking shut, I felt what he must have felt. Back in '63, putting up that gate for the first time. That became my morning ritual, standing at the gate, breathing in the smell of rain-soaked earth, listening to the wind talk through the leaves. I'd remember Granddad's words. Keep your papers clean. Know your boundaries. Never let anyone take what isn't theirs. Simple, honest rules, the kind that don't need lawyers. Until someone comes along and decides they just don't apply to them. I didn't know it then, but someone was about to test those rules. Exactly 1 month later. Didn't realize that the brass lock I just cleaned was about to become the first casualty in a fight I never wanted. Maybe I should have known. Land like this, sitting quiet for too long, people start mistaking quiet for vacancy. They see empty space and think it's theirs for the taking. Granddad, some folks think being silent means you'll comply. They confuse kindness for weakness. Mistake polite for pushover. He taught me the difference between being polite and being a doormat. between compromise and surrender. You can share a fence line without giving up an inch. And if someone steps across, you don't ask twice. I finished painting the gate on a warm Tuesday afternoon. Sun on my back, paint under my fingernails. The letters, private property. Est. 1963 stood out sharp as ever. I locked it. Heard that brass click. Walked back to the house with my hands still streaked black and my granddad's voice in my head. That night, every document went back in the steel lockbox. Original deed, surveyor's map, notarized agreements, my own title transfer, county registration, tax receipts, everything in order. Paper matters most when someone's about to. They showed up. I was out by the eastern fence, trimming dead branches off the oak. Saturday afternoon so quiet you could hear leaves settling. Then a car engine slowing. Tires crunching gravel outside the gate. I kept working a moment, thinking someone was just turning around like people sometimes did by the old fence post. But the engine cut off. Doors opened. Voices professional. Clipped. Voices that expected to be listened to. I wiped sawdust from my hands. Went to the window. 3 people stood at the gate, dressed for a business meeting. Not a visit. The woman in front, navy blazer. Hair pulled tight. Posture like a flagpole, clipboard in one hand. Phone in the other. Taking pictures of my gate. My house. My trees, everything she had no right to. The two with her. Man and woman. Matching polos with some logo. Writing notes. Pointing at things. None of them called out. None knocked, just stood there. Documenting my life like I was a code violation. The woman in the blazer tried the gate. Locked. Of course. She rattled it. Then pressed the doorbell on the stone pillar, held it down. Too long. Letting the chime echo through the house. I watched a bit longer. Made them wait. Then finally walked out, boots crunching on gravel. Taking my time. I didn't unlock the gate. The bars felt just right. A real boundary. Can I help you? I asked, keeping everything calm. Hands in plain view. Rule 1: don't escalate before you know who you're dealing with. She straightened up, adjusted her clipboard, gave me a smile that never touched her eyes. I'm Claudia Vance, president of the Wellington Meadows Homeowners Association. We need to inspect your property. Not would you mind. Not could we please need. Like my permission was a box she was checking off. I looked who'd stopped writing and were watching me, waiting for me to obey. Inspect it for what? I asked. Claudia's smile tightened. Your tree branches extend beyond the permitted boundary. Your gate doesn't meet the aesthetic standards for this community. And you haven't paid your HOA dues this year. Each point, like a courtroom charge delivered with the practiced confidence of someone used to getting her way. I let the silence drag out. Watched her confidence harden. I don't belong to the HOA. I said. Just that. No room for argument. She gave a quick, sharp laugh. Every property in this radius belongs to the HOA. You can verify that on our website. She waved vaguely at the subdivision, identical houses lined up like dominoes. The bylaws are clear. So are property records. I replied. HOA boundary stops 50 meters before this gate. My land's from 1963. Your association started in 2005. Do the math. One of the polo-wearing note-takers shifted. Looked at Claudia like they were waiting for her to shoot me down. Claudia didn't flinch. We'll verify that, she said, voice turning cold. In the meantime, you need to comply with this notice. She pulled a paper from her clipboard, pushed it through the gate. I took it, barely looking. I already knew what it would say. Trim the oak within 14 days. Replace the iron gate with an approved beige composite wood gate. Pay 3 years of backdated HOA fees $4. 200. Failure to comply. $150 per day in fines, plus legal action per their bylaws. I folded the paper up. To my pocket. I won't be doing any of this, I said. Her patience snapped to ice. You'll regret that decision. We have legal counsel. So do I told her, then turned and walked away, notice in my pocket. Her words in the air behind me. Only when their car pulled away did I let the anger come in. Sharp and clean. They'd come onto my land. Taken photos. Tried to impose rules that had no standing. With the absolute certainty that they were right. After they left, I walked the property line, checked for disturbances. Found them. Sure enough. By the eastern hedge, fresh boot prints. Pressed deep in the flower bed. Someone standing to peer over the fence. They'd been here before today. And now I knew to look. Checked the camera footage from last week, 15 minutes missing. Just gone. At the time, I thought it was a glitch. Now I understood. Someone with access to local power controls had killed the camera, someone who knew what they were doing. Claudia hadn't picked me at random. She'd planned this. That night, I made two decisions. First, I put up a backup camera completely offline, recording to local storage, camouflaged up in the oak. Clear view of the gate and drive. Second, I started building a file, photographed the boot prints, documented the missing footage, filed the HOA notice with my deed and the boundary map. Granddad was right. Paper saves you. Claudia would try next. But I was ready to start collecting proof. That land had taught me patience. Granddad had taught me preparation. Claudia Vance just taught me that some people mistake silence for weakness. That night I stood at the gate, coffee in hand. Last light fading. The brass lock caught the sunset. Iron bars solid in the dusk. Somewhere out there, Claudia was planning her next move. I could feel it in the air. The way you feel a storm coming, pressure building. Ready to break. Let her plan. I had something she didn't. Truth. And time. The next week, I was in libraries, county offices, building a case the way my grandfather built that gate, slow. Methodical. Nothing missed. County records had everything I needed. Original plat map from 2005, showing exactly where the HOA began. Minutes from the meeting that established Wellington Meadows. Complete list of parcels inside it. My address wasn't there. Couldn't be. Land had been Corbett since 1963, before anyone even dreamed up Wellington Meadows. I made copies, had them notarized, organized everything in a leather folder. When I brought it to the property attorney everyone recommended, she spent 20 minutes reviewing it before looking up, half smiling. They don't have a case. Your land's outside their jurisdiction. No legal authority. None at all. The HOA called a special meeting, inviting me to explain myself. That's how the email phrased it. Explain yourself. Like I was a kid caught skipping class. I went. Not to show weakness, just to give them a chance to see sense before it got ugly. The room was set up like a tribunal, 15 board members in a semicircle. One chair in the center. Like an interrogation. I sat down with my folder. Nothing else, no coffee. No nerves. Just patience. Claudia opened with the same script violations. Aesthetic standards. Unpaid dues. You could tell she'd given this speech 100 times. When she finished, she looked at me like she expected an apology. I didn't give her one. Opened the folder. Slid out the county plat map. Laid it flat. This is the HOA boundary as registered in 2005. This is my property boundary from 1963. They don't intersect. You could feel the silence buzzing. Electric. One board member leaned forward. Doubt in his eyes. Claudia's certainty cracked. That map could be falsified, she said, but her voice was losing its bite. I pulled out a certified letter from the county land office, embossed seal. Registrar's signature. This confirms the map's authentic and current. Also confirms my property isn't, and never was, part of Wellington Meadows HOA. The attorney, a tired-looking guy in his 50s, picked up the letter. Read it. You could see the weight drop off his shoulder. She realized exactly what it meant. MS. Vance, he said, voice quiet. These documents appear to be legitimate. But Claudia wasn't ready to give up. Regardless of property lines, you still need to comply with our aesthetic standards. Your gate is an eyesore. Your trees are overgrown. We have standards here. I closed the folder. Stood up. I don't belong to your HOA. You have no authority over my property. Can inspect it, photograph it, or send me notices. Keep it up, and I'll file for harassment. I made eye contact with each board member. No negotiation. My grandfather built this land from 20 years' savings. Built the gate with his own hands. I won't let your bylaws erase what he made. I left the documents on the table, let them stare at the truth. Drove home with the windows down, trying to forget the look on Claudia's face. I didn't wonder long what she'd do next. Pride beats common sense every time. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when I heard it car engine idling at the gate. Footsteps on gravel. The hiss of spray paint. I ran to the window, caught taillights as they sped away. In the morning, I found the message. Pay up or leave. Red paint. Dripping down my gate like blood. The camera caught it all, figure in a black hoodie. Working quick. Glancing over their shoulder. Not enough to ID. But enough to prove it happened. I saved the footage. Printed screenshots. Added it to the growing file. Left the paint up as a reminder some people would rather destroy what they can't control than admit they were wrong. 3 days later, a letter arrived, county seal. Official envelope. But the minute I opened it, I knew something was off. Claimed my gate violated building codes. Needed to be removed in 7 days. Or they'd send enforcement. Email listed was a generic domain. Not the county's. No phone number. No appeal instructions. I called the planning department, read them the case number. The woman on the line was polite but firm. We haven't sent any violation notice to your address. And we don't handle gate aesthetics unless it's a safety issue. This isn't from us. She sent me an official statement saying Sounder stood right away that someone was impersonating her office. This is forgery. You should file a police report. I said I would, but not yet. I needed them to make one more mistake. It didn't take long. Friday night, 1:30 a.m. Backup camera caught everything, a black SUV. Tape over the license plates. Engine running. 2 people got out, one with bolt cutters. One holding a phone. I recognized her, the president. Claudia. Rigid as ever. She stood back while her friend cut through the brass lock, me granddad's lock, sound of metal snapping. Echoing across the yard. They pushed through. Started photographing everything, me house. Studio. Trees. Flower beds. Tried to take the gate off. But the old rusted bolts wouldn't budge. After 5 minutes, they gave up. That's when I flipped on the lights, yard lit up like a stadium. They froze. I opened the door and yelled. Police are on the way. Claudia ran for the SUV. Slipped on gravel. Something flying from her neck, a pearl necklace. Engraved clasp. CVHA president. They tore off. Tires flinging stones. Gate left hanging open. Lock on the ground. Police showed up 10 minutes later. I handed over everything, video. Necklace. Fake letter. One officer watched the video 3 times. Pausing on Claudia's face. That's good evidence. He said. Real good. Trespassing. Property damage. Attempted burglary. Forgery is a separate charge. 2 days later. My phone rang, a homeowner in Wellington Meadows. Nervous but steady. She was an accountant. Said she'd lived there for years. Watch Claudia get more aggressive. I have recordings from closed board meetings. She told me. The president said you needed to be taught a lesson. That paperwork didn't matter. I asked if she'd testify. She hesitated, afraid of retaliation. If you can protect me legally, then yes, I'll do it. I met my attorney, showed her everything. Videos. Photos. Witness. Necklace. Fake letter. It's enough? She said. More than enough. They're going to lose. Badly. 3 weeks later. Lawsuit filed. The real fight had begun. The next 2 weeks felt like living in a courthouse. Not a home. I spent every waking hour outside of drinking too much coffee and pacing my living room, just organizing evidence. Labeling. Double-checking timelines. I had my file laid out like a prosecutor would. Every photo. Every document. Every video clip burned to 3 separate drives. Even the physical stuff, the severed brass lock. The necklace in a plastic bag. The paint sample scraped from my gate sat locked in a drawer, ready for whatever came next. My attorney went over it all twice. Nodded. Told me. They can't challenge the boundary. The video footage is undeniable. And that necklace is as close as you get to a smoking gun in property law. But here's the thing, winning wasn't enough for me. I wanted the truth out. I wanted every single person who'd watched this nightmare unfold to know exactly what happened and why. We filed the suit on a Tuesday. I remember because I barely slept the night before. Staring at the ceiling. Listening to the old house settle. Ellis Corbett versus Claudia Vance and the Wellington Meadows Homeowners Association. For charges trespassing. property damage, harassment, and forgery of government documents. Damages. We listed out plain as day. 8 grand for repairs and security. 50 for emotional distress and lost sleep. 15,000 in legal fees. 2,000 for court costs. Everything documented. Everything legit. The process server delivered copies by certified mail. Signature required. So Claudia couldn't claim she never got them. She called me 3 hours later. Voice stripped of all that forced politeness hard. Clipped. You think you can intimidate me with lawyers? You're going to lose everything. I kept it simple. Just said, see you in court. Hung up before I could say anything I'd regret. That night, the accountant who'd called me before she posted the whole story on a neighborhood app didn't name anyone, didn't leak my evidence. But she told the truth. Said the HOA had no jurisdiction. That leadership had targeted someone they knew was outside the lines. That forged documents and late-night vandalism had happened. That there was proof. That post went everywhere. Neighbors started sharing their own stories. Excessive fines for a flower bed. Arbitrary rule changes. Financial records that didn't add up. One old lady, bless her, said she'd paid 2 grand for violations because she was too afraid to fight. The community split, some sided with the president, saying my suit was ruining their property values. Others, a lot quieter but growing, started wondering if maybe the leadership had been abusing power for years. And I was just the first stubborn enough to call their bluff. Local newspaper called. Wanted an interview. I turned it down, said what mattered would come out in court. Let the judge decide. 3 days before the hearing, the HOA's attorney tried to settle. 5 grand and a written apology. Promised never to contact me again. My lawyer relayed the offer. Waited. No. I said, I don't want their money. I want the truth out loud. In front of a judge. She nodded, almost smiling. They're going to attack your character. Make you look like a troublemaker. Be ready. I told her I'd been ready since the first time Claudia rattled my gate. The courtroom was smaller than you'd think. Not like you see on TV. All marble and wood, just a room with 40 seats. Too many people. And a judge who looked like she'd seen it all. Silver hair. Steely eyes. Voice that didn't mess around. She started right off, read the charges. Looked up. Told everyone not to waste her time. The HOA's lawyer tried to reframe everything. Painted me as a crank. A neighbor who refused to get along. Who deliberately provoked conflict. Claimed I was using a technicality to dodge responsibility. My attorney didn't stand up. Didn't get dramatic, just said, Your Honor, Mr. Corbett has never belonged to the HOA. That's not a technicality. That's the whole case. The judge nodded. Let's see the boundary documentation. My attorney handed over the certified county plat map. The letter from the land office. The judge spent less than a minute with them. Then said, This is clear. The HOA has no jurisdiction over the plaintiff's property. From that moment, you could feel the air change. The defense started scrambling. Me attorney queued up the video footage on the courtroom screen. First clip. Someone in a black hoodie. 2 in the morning. Spray painting my gate. Second. 2 people, one unmistakably Claudia cutting the lock and pushing through. When the lights came on, the camera caught her face dead on. Third. Her photographing everything. Standing where she had no right. No narration. Just raw footage. The sound of the spray paint. The crunch of gravel. The click of the lock. Everyone in that courtroom felt it. My attorney set the necklace on the evidence table. Clasp engraved. Plastic baggie. Clear as day. Recovered at the scene. Belongs to MS. Vance. Dropped while trespassing. Claudia's face went ghost white. Her lawyer whispering in her ear. He tried one last time. My client believed she was conducting an inspection within her authority. The judge shut him down. There's video evidence of your client breaking a lock at 1:30 in the morning. That's not inspection. That's breaking and entering. Then came the forged letter, the real nail in the coffin. My attorney showed the fake, official violation notice. Then the statement from the planning department disavowing it. Forgery of government documents is a felony, she said, voice low but steady. MS. Vance used her position to create a false threat. The defense attorney had nothing left. He just stared at his notes. The accountant testified next, voice shaky but steady, playing the board meeting recording where Claudia said I needed to be taught a lesson, regardless of the documents. The judge went to her chambers for 15 minutes. Silence hung heavy. She came back. Didn't waste a word. I find the defendants guilty on all 4 charges. Ms. Vance, you are ordered to pay $75,000 in damages. You must resign immediately from the HOA and are barred from holding any leadership in any HOA for 10 years. Forgery charge will be referred for criminal prosecution. She looked right at Claudiano's sympathy. No soft landing. You abused your position, violated the law, and tried to intimidate someone for defending their rights. This court will not tolerate such behavior. When the gavel came down, it felt like a bone had finally set, like something out of place finally slid back where it belonged. Claudia never looked at me. Her lawyer guided her out. I stayed seated, took my time, gathered up my folder, my jacket, stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight. 3 days after the ruling, police came to Claudia's house. I didn't watch her arrest, but neighbors said she didn't fight, just got in the car and let the whole block film it on their phones. By night, the video was all over town. The HOA board called an emergency meeting the next morning. The accountant who testified she became interim president. No one else even wanted the job. Her first act was to dissolve the old board, launch a full audit, send apology letters and refunds for all the bogus fines. 23 grand in checks mailed back in 2 weeks. The apology they sent me was short. Honest admitted they never had jurisdiction. Never should have contacted me. No excuses. No wiggle room. But the damage ran deeper. 17 families filed to withdraw from the HOA legal right after misconduct. Property values didn't crash, but the development's reputation took a hit. Houses sat unsold. Buyers asked about the trial. Some blamed me, said I'd ruined their neighborhood. Others, quietly, thanked me at the grocery store, saying they'd been scared for years. The HOA's lawyer got his own punishment. The state bar suspended him for 2 years for going along with a case he knew was bogus. For helping harass me. He closed his practice. Moved out of state. I didn't celebrate. I just felt tired. Consequences spread further than anyone ever thinks. 8 weeks later, Claudia's criminal trial. She took a plea deal. 6 months suspended. 200 hours community service. 10 grand in fines. 10 years barred from community boards. The judge told her flat out, you used your position of trust to commit fraud and trespass. Consider yourself lucky this court is showing leniency. Her marriage ended. Husband filed for separation. She moved 3 counties away. Alone. I didn't follow what happened after. I didn't want revenge, just consequences. An acknowledgement that what she did was wrong. And a promise it wouldn't happen again. That's what the court gave me. A month later, I stood at the gate. Sun just coming up. Air cool and sharp. Thought about how certainty authority can crumble fast when it's built on sand. Claudia was so sure rules and lawyers would bend reality for her. She never understood that power without legitimacy is just force. And force, sooner or later, meets something it can't move. The gate still stood. The land still belonged to my family. The new lock, cast by a local metalworker. Same alloy. Fit so well you couldn't tell where old ended and new began. I repainted the sign by hand, the way Granddad would have done, layer over layer. Private property. Est. 1963. Replanted the trampled flower beds with native roots. Hid new cameras where no one would find them. The land looked untouched by all the chaos. Which was the whole point. My grandfather's legacy strong as ever. Most mornings, things went back to quiet. Coffee at the gate. Light through the oaks. Wind whispering in the leaves. Me ritual. Cars would slow down sometimes. Drivers curious. Maybe recognizing the gate from the news. I never waved. The gate spoke for itself. Sometimes I'd open the old lockbox deeds. Survey maps. The purchase agreement. Every document that ever mattered. I added my own. The court ruling. The boundary certification. The police report. Not because I thought I'd need them again, but because paper matters. Someday, someone else will inherit this land. They'll need to know it was defended with words and facts. Not fists, On top, I placed a photo of Granddaddy Young. Strong, hand on the iron bars. I wrote a note, folded it, slid it into the box. You taught me how to hold on. I did. No one took it. Life went back to normal. I shot portraits for local families, took assignments for magazines, architects wanting photos of old barns and houses before renovations. Studio worked better than ever, north-facing windows. Soft light all day. Neighbors who'd been cold before started waving, or at least nodding. Sometimes we talked about weather, about the crops, never about the HOA. That was fine by me. Months later, the interim HOA president sent me a message. Thank you for forcing changes. The association's better, more transparent, more accountable. People aren't afraid anymore. I wrote back, told her I was glad, but I still had no interest in joining. This land stands separate. That's not hostility. It's history. She understood. Some boundaries don't divide. They preserve. A year after the trial, I stood at the gate. Coffee steaming. Leaves falling from the oaks. A kid from the neighborhood stopped on his way to the bus. Why don't you get a new gate? He asked, eyeing the old iron bars. I smiled, knelt down, ran my fingers over the hand-painted letters. Because this one has a story. I told him. It reminds me some things can't be bought. They have to be kept. The kid just nodded, probably didn't really get it. But maybe one day he will. I watched him go, turned back to the house, closed the gate behind me. Lock clicked. Certain and final. This land was still Granddad's, and now it was mine. Not because I fought for it, though I did. Not because I won in court, though that counted. Because I understood. Ownership is knowing what's worth protecting, and having the patience to protect it right. The wind moved through the trees. Sun climbed higher. The land, old and stubborn and mine, stayed exactly where it always was. And I stayed. Too, standing guard at a gate built by hands I still miss. Ready to do it all again, if that's what it takes. You know, sometimes folks ask me if I regret it, if I wish I'd just painted the gate beige, trimmed the trees, written a check, called it a day. I get why they'd wonder. Fighting back takes a toll, not just on your nerves, but on your sense of trust. Even now, sometimes when I hear a car stop out front, I get that old prickling in my chest, wondering if it's trouble coming up the drive. But then I look out across those 2 acres, sun catching on dew in the grass. The shape of that old hedge. The house Granddad built. Every stone marker he set in, I remember. This isn't just land. It's a story, living and breathing. One that started before I was born and, God willing, will keep going long after I'm gone. You don't back down from that. You don't fold because someone in a suit waves a piece of paper and calls themselves president. After the dust settled, life did what it always does, it crept back in. I started noticing things I'd let slide during the battle. A loose shingle on the roof. The way the front steps creaked when it rained. Granddad's old wheelbarrow, half buried under a pile of leaves behind the garage. I spent a few weekends fixing what needed fixing. Painted the porch, oiled the hinges, dug up the old flower beds, and replanted them with wildflower seeds from the same mix Granddad had used in the 60s. Still sold by the feed store in town. People kept stopping by, at first out of curiosity, later just to talk. Some were neighbors from Wellington Meadows. A few sheepish, more than one apologetic, wanting to distance themselves from the old regime. I never agreed with what Claudia did. They'd say, or, we always knew your place wasn't part of the HOA. But she wouldn't listen. I'd nod, make coffee if the mood struck. Most of them just needed to say it out loud to tell someone they'd been afraid. 2. That they felt lighter now. There were others. 2. Folks from further out, people who'd read about the case in the paper, seen a clip online, or heard it secondhand from a friend at church or the hardware store. They'd pull up, park by the gate, sometimes just sit there a minute, looking at the ironwork, the hand-painted letters, as if trying to understand what it was about this place that made it worth fighting for. Sometimes they'd get out, introduce themselves, and tell me their own stories, tales of lost deeds, bad neighbors, family land threatened by strangers with more money and better lawyers. One man, Tom, drove down from 2 counties over. He'd lost his own family farm to a bank error that took 3 years and more money than he had to untangle. He stood there, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, looking at my gate, then at me, and said, "I wish I'd had a grandfather like yours." Or maybe just his sense to keep every scrap of paper. We talked for hours, swapping stories, sharing the kind of silent understanding that only comes from having your back to the wall and nowhere left to run. It got me thinking about what Granddad really passed down to me. Not just land, or a house, or a collection of deeds in a box under the bed. He passed down a way of seeing the world, a sense that what's right doesn't change just because someone says so. That if something's worth building, it's worth protecting. That you hold your ground not out of stubbornness, but out of respect. Respect for yourself, your family, and the people who came before. That winter, the first real cold snap hit hard. The oaks dropped their last leaves. The hedge turned brittle. Frost feathered the kitchen windows in the mornings. I found myself thinking about the night Granddad died, how he'd insisted on sitting out on the porch, wrapped in his old army blanket, sipping tea while the wind howled through the trees. He'd looked out across the yard and said, "You watch? Ella, sooner or later, someone'll try to take what you've got. Don't let them. Son, not without a fight." I think about that night more often than I care to admit. I think about the quiet strength it takes to stand alone, not angry, not bitter, just unmovable. The new year came in with a dusting of snow. The land slept. Peaceful. I spent the holidays with family cousins from out of state. Aunts who remembered Granddad's cornbread recipe better than I ever will. We sat around the kitchen table, told stories, passed around yellowed photographs. One of my cousins, a city girl with a heart of gold and a law degree, pulled me aside after dinner. "You know," she said, "what you did. It matters. Not just for you, for all of us. You set a line in the sand." I laughed, shook my head. I just didn't want to lose the gate. She smiled, squeezed my arm. "Doesn't matter why you stood up, just that you did." I started writing more after that, journals. Mostly, nothing fancy. Stories about the land, about Granddad, about what it means to belong somewhere. I sent a few to the local paper, and to my surprise, they printed them. Folks started writing back, sometimes in letters, sometimes just little notes left in my mailbox, always thanking me for putting into words what they felt but couldn't say. One morning, I woke to a letter from a woman named June. Lived 5 towns over. Her family's land was about to be swallowed up by a new development. HOA breathing down their necks, threatening legal action if they didn't comply with rules that hadn't even existed the year before. She'd read my story in the paper. Wanted advice. How do you do it? She wrote. How do you hold on when everyone around you says give up? I sat at the kitchen table a long time, staring at her letter, sipping cold coffee. Then I wrote back, as best I could. Told her what Granddad told me. Paper matters. Truth matters. Boundaries are reminders of what you protect. You don't have to be loud or mean, just steady. Document everything. Stand up when the time comes. And remember, you're not alone. Maybe that's the real lesson, what nobody tells you about fighting for what's yours. It's never just about you. There are people watching, learning, finding their own courage because you found yours first. And every time someone else stands their ground, the world shifts a little closer to right. Spring came early that year. Wildflowers came up in the old beds, bright blue and yellow, the kind that grow deep roots and last through anything. The gate stood as it always had, paint a little brighter, lock turning smooth, story as strong as ever. And me? I kept showing up. Every morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun come up over land my grandfather trusted me to protect. Quiet, steady, exactly where I was meant to be. Because in the end, that's what ownership really is. Its memory, its story. It's the long echo of someone's hard work in the soil beneath your feet. And if you ever find yourself on the edge of a fight you didn't ask for, I hope you remember this. You don't have to win the world over. You just have to hold your ground. And if anybody ever tries to tell you that you don't own your own gate, well, you know what to do. After that spring, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Mornings at the gate with coffee in hand. Afternoons in the studio. Evenings repairing, cataloging, and documenting the land. I started paying closer attention to the little things, the creak of the porch when the wind blew, the way sunlight filtered through the oak leaves onto the driveway, the sound of frogs in the pond during summer nights. Every detail mattered because every detail was part of the story my grandfather had left me. One Saturday, I decided to walk the property line from end to end. The eastern fence, the oak grove, the back hedgerow, everything. It had been years since anyone had traversed it carefully, and I wanted to know every stone, every tree, every marker. As I walked, I found old evidence of Granddad's work-a-worn path where he used to carry firewood, the indentation of posts he'd replaced decades ago, a small pile of stones he'd used to mark corners. I could almost hear him chuckling at the meticulousness with which I documented everything. I swear, standing there, I felt him beside me, his hand on my shoulder, murmuring, "Boundaries aren't there to keep people out. They're reminders of what you protect." It was around that time that I started noticing people stopping by, not with malicious intent, just curiosity. Sometimes families walking the neighborhood would pause to look at the gate. I never waved. I just let them watch. One elderly man, leaning on his cane, nodded knowingly when he saw the private property estate 1963-inch sign. It was like he understood, without a word, that this wasn't just a gate. It was a declaration of history, of endurance, of a principle. Summer rolled in with a vengeance that year. The oaks stretched wide and thick, their shade covering most of the yard, cooling the air in the heat of the day. The wildflowers were in full bloom, colors vibrant, reminding me of how resilient nature could be. It was then I realized that the fight with the HOA, the vandalism, the forged letters had changed me, not in a bitter way, but in a steady, unshakable way. I felt anchored, more connected to the land than ever, and strangely lighter, despite all the chaos I had endured. Then came the day a local history teacher reached out to me. She'd been researching the neighborhood, the development, and the older land parcels. She wanted to document my grandfather's property as part of a project for students learning about local history and the value of preserving family lands. We spent a day walking the property, photographing the original gate, the hedgerows, the house, and the oak trees. She interviewed me about my grandfather, about the fight with the HOA, about what the land meant to me. It was surreal, talking about all the chaos, all the legal battles, as if it were just part of the story, not the defining moment of my life. But it was quietly, fiercely defining. The story went on to be shared at her school, as part of a local history exhibit, and I realized then that my grandfather's legacy had a life beyond just me. That gate, those boundaries, the meticulous paper she had left them as more than defense. They were lessons, for me and for anyone who might come after, on how to stand firm, how to protect what matters, how to carry on a legacy with integrity. Autumn came, and with it the first frost that painted the property white in the early morning light. I walked the yard, checking the gate, ensuring the lock turned smoothly, and running my hands over the hand-painted letters. I had repainted them a few times over the months, each coat adding layers to the story, each stroke a quiet homage to Granddad's patience and craft. I took photographs, not for evidence this time, but for memory, to remember how the land looked before winter stripped it bare, before the trees let go of their leaves, before everything went dormant for a few months. Neighbors continued to adjust to the new HOA leadership. The former president was gone from the community, but her shadow lingered in conversations, in sideways glances, in the cautious politeness of folks who had once feared repercussions. I respected that fear. It's hard to stand up when the consequences are unclear. But now, with transparency and accountability restored, people felt emboldened. There was laughter again at block parties, conversations at the mailbox, and a sense of cautious optimism threading through Wellington meadows. And I was just part of the background, watching from the gate, knowing that I'd helped shift the balance not with anger, not with vengeance, but by standing firm, documenting meticulously, and holding true to principle. The studio saw more work in the fall, photographing seasonal changes, family portraits, capturing the golden light that fell over the open fields in the late afternoon. I started offering workshops for young photographers, teaching them not just about composition and light, but about patience, observation, and respect, lessons learned from my grandfather, and reinforced through a year of defending what was ours. Each student who left with a better understanding of craft, of diligence, of respect for land and property, reminded me that the fight I endured wasn't just about legalities, it was about teaching resilience, legacy, and integrity through example. Winter arrived again. Snow dusted the driveway, clinging to the oak branches, turning the land into a quiet, white sanctuary. I stood at the gate with coffee, watching steam rise from my breath in the crisp air. The snow muffled the world, and for a moment, everything felt paused, like time itself had bowed to the weight of history and the stories held in the soil beneath my feet. The brass lock glinted faintly in the morning sun, the iron bars dark and steadfast, and I understood completely why my grandfather had made them himself. There was an artistry in it. Yes, but more than theta commitment. A promise that what mattered would endure, no matter the storms that came. One morning, a child from the neighborhood wandered by, school bag slung over one shoulder. She stopped at the gate, fingers brushing the black iron letters. "Why don't you get a new one?" she asked innocently. I crouched down, let my fingers trace the ridges of the paint, feeling each layer, each brush stroke. "Because this one has a story," I told her. "Some things can't just be bought. They have to be kept." She nodded, perhaps not fully understanding, but with that quiet attention that makes you feel certain she grasped something deeper, something about care, responsibility, and history. The land was mine now, truly, not just because of the court ruling or the lawsuit, but because I understood its value and honored the effort, the vision, and the hands that had shaped it long before I was born. I rose, stood behind the gate, and listened to the wind move through the trees, watched sunlight dance across the old fence posts, and felt a calm certainty settle over me. The property, the land, and its history were safe. The lessons, preserved in metal, paint, and soil, had passed from Granddad to me, and one day would pass again to someone who understood the meaning of stewardship. The fight, the legal battle, the sleepless nights, and the tension, those were over. But the story, the life of the land, the legacy of care, the value of patience and preparation that continues. Every morning, standing at that gate with coffee warming my hands, I am reminded of it all. Ownership is not just about deeds, laws, or victories. Ownership is knowing what is worth protecting and having the patience, the courage, and the foresight to protect it properly. And that is a lesson I carry with me, always. After that winter, the rhythm of life on the property settled into something almost meditative. Mornings at the gate with coffee, afternoons in the studio with my camera, evenings spent checking locks, clearing leaves, or cataloging old photographs and documents. The land had a voice now, a quiet one, but unmistakable. It told me when the wind shifted, when the frost had set, when the deer wandered close to the hedgerow. I'd learned to listen, because after everything, I realized that the land itself was as much a part of the story as any human confrontation. By the following spring, I started noticing subtle changes in the neighborhood too. Some of the Wellington Meadows residents were coming around, cautiously curious at first, then gradually more open. Parents walking kids to the bus stop would pause at the gate, peek inside, sometimes wave, sometimes just nod knowingly. People had been watching for a year, now watching the gate, watching the land, watching how I treated it. And I suppose some of them saw a reflection of what they'd wanted to do themselves, but hadn't dared. One afternoon, a local teacher, Ms. Carter, came by. She'd heard about the property, the history, and the legal battle, and she wanted to show her students how history and modern life intersected. We walked the entire property line together, me explaining each stone marker, each hedge, the way the oak trees had been planted, and how the old gate had been forged by hand. She took photos, recorded snippets for the students, and asked me to tell the story about Granddad and the HOA. For a couple of hours, it was less about law, less about litigation, and more about heritage, about perseverance, about standing for something even when the world told you it didn't matter. And that's when I realized the impact of the fight hadn't been just personal. It rippled outward. People saw what happens when you refuse to be bullied, when you document meticulously, when you uphold the truth. I began getting letters and emails from all over the state. Some were small thank you notes from people who had quietly suffered under unfair HOA rules. Others were more desperate people asking for advice, looking for guidance on how to protect their own land, their own history. One letter came from a family about 3 counties over. Their farmland was threatened by developers, and HOA-like regulations had been creeping in without notice. The mother of the family wrote, "Your story gave me courage. You reminded me it's worth fighting for what's ours." I wrote back, patiently explaining the same lessons Granddad had taught me. Papers matter. Documentation matters. History matters. Keep meticulous records. Respect boundaries. Respect yourself. And be prepared. Summer rolled in, and the land seemed to breathe easier. I spent long mornings photographing the fields, the flowers, the oak trees, capturing the way sunlight streamed across the property. I held workshops in the studio for young photographers, teaching them not just how to compose a shot, but how to observe, how to respect their subjects, and how to understand patience and dedication in a craft. Every student left understanding that care and attention to detail aren't just skills theory ways of life. Autumn arrived with gold and crimson leaves, and I found myself walking the property line in the cool mornings, noticing the changes. The hedgerows were thick and healthy, the oak leaves crisp underfoot. I spotted small animals, foxes and squirrels, evidence of a land returning to a rhythm unbroken by human intrusion. I thought about how Granddad had seen this decades before, and how I had inherited not just land, but a stewardship, a responsibility to protect something larger than myself. Even the smallest moments carried weight. A neighbor's child passing by, staring at the gate, asking me why it wasn't replaced with a new one. I knelt down, ran my fingers along the paint layers, each stroke a memory, a story, a lesson. Because this one has a story, I said, it reminds me that some things can't be bought. They have to be kept. The kid nodded, probably didn't fully understand. But in that pause, I felt a connection, a passing of knowledge without words, a silent acknowledgement of what it meant to care for something beyond yourself. Winter returned again. Snow settled over the property, quieting the world outside. I stood at the gate one morning, coffee warming my hands, steam rising in the cold air, looking at the landscape my grandfather had built and protected. I could hear the faint whistle of wind through the oaks, the crunch of frost underfoot, and the distant sound of life stirring beyond my 2 acres. I felt the continuity of generations, of work, of care. Everything felt intact, preserved not just by fences and locks, but by vigilance, respect, and patience. The studio remained busy. Assignments came in from families, magazines, and local architects. The north-facing windows of the converted back room gave perfect light for editing, and the old wooden structure, creaking in the wind, had a warmth and character that no modern building could match. Neighbors who had been silent during the conflict began to greet me more openly, some even thanking me quietly for forcing accountability in the HOA. Others still kept a careful distance, but that was fine. The land, the gate, and the history it contained were enough. Months passed. The HOA leadership stabilized under the interim president. Policies became transparent. Independent audits were conducted, and restitution was made for any wrongful fines. The association itself had changed, more accountable, more open, less prone to intimidation. People's lives quieted, but the lesson remained clear. History and truth carry weight beyond authority, beyond threats, beyond fleeting power. I kept a routine: morning coffee at the gate, walking the perimeter, maintaining the hedges, repainting the gate when necessary, tending the flower beds, cataloging the photographs, preserving the documentation. The lock turned smooth every morning, the letters on the gate as bold and precise as when Granddad first painted them. Standing there, I felt the weight of responsibility. Yes, but also the calm certainty of stewardship, of knowing that the land, the history, and the legacy were safe. Even as years passed, I continued to receive letters, notes, and sometimes visits from people inspired by the story, seeking guidance or simply wanting to understand what it meant to defend one's own property. I shared what I could, emphasizing patience, preparation, and respect for history. I never asked for recognition, never sought fame. What mattered was that the lessons were passed on, quietly, steadily, in the same way my grandfather's care had shaped the land and my understanding of it. Each day, standing at the gate, I would sip my coffee, watch the light shift through the oak leaves, feel the wind move across the fields, and listen to the land itself. Every creak of the porch, every rustle in the hedge, every bird call reminded me that this was alive, protected, and enduring. This was my inheritance, not just the property, but the knowledge that standing firm, documenting carefully, and respecting the past allows something to survive generations, to withstand threats, to remain intact for those who come after. And so life continued quiet, steady, full of small victories and the kind of joy that comes from knowing that you are exactly where you are supposed to be, protecting something that matters more than money, more than recognition, more than transient authority. I stood at the gate, watched the sunlight move through the oak leaves, sipped my coffee, and smiled, knowing the land, Granddad's legacy, and my own commitment had endured.